Age Tech Innovators.
Hello, and welcome to Age Tech Innovators, the podcast where we explore how technology is transforming the way we care for our vulnerable population. I'm Monty, your host, and each week we chat with inspiring leaders who are making a real difference in the lives of vulnerable people, sharing innovations and ideas that help support and uplift those who need it most. Join us as we work together to build a brighter, more caring future for everyone. Now, let's dive in. So I have the absolute pleasure of chatting with Mike today. Mike, run me through who you are and what you do in 60 seconds.
I'm happy to be here today. My name is Michael Bangerter. I'm based in Salt Lake City, Utah, in the United States. I am one of the owners and board members of Mytrex Inc. We're a medical alert manufacturer. We manufacture PERS devices right here, both mobile PERS and in-home PERS, and also a remote patient monitoring solution. And we also operate a monitoring center, 2 of them actually, and we answer calls in Canada and United States from medical alarms. So people who push their button in an emergency and save countless lives through our product. And what's neat about us is our devices that we manufacture they're agnostic. So they can be monitored with us, or they can be monitored with a wholesale monitoring center elsewhere. We don't limit the ability to be monitored in only one place. So both our mobile PERS and our in-home PERS devices can be monitored anywhere.
Amazing. And you mentioned that you're one of the owners. And I already know the backstory, or some of the backstory. I had the pleasure of having some of the context when I came to Mama where we met. But for our listeners, they'd be really curious about how you actually got into this industry. How did you begin your journey on innovation?
Yeah, it's a cool story. It's a family-owned business. My father started it before I was born in the 80s. He read an article in Reader's Digest one day that was about a gentleman somewhere in the United States who had a stroke and sort of fell over off of his chair onto the ground. This was before the 911 system sort of was prevalent in the United States, so he couldn't just dial 911 and have somebody know where he was, but he also, because of the stroke, was unable to speak. So luckily, he got this very intuitive police officer that answered the phone at his local police department. And through his sort of grunting and everything, the police officer realized someone was in distress. And so he pulled out a paper map and started asking yes or no questions to try and narrow down where this gentleman was and to get him help. And over the course of about an hour, he would tell the gentleman, "Are you in between block 1 and 2 of Main Street?" and tap once for yes and 2 for no. And so the gentleman who needed help would hit the phone twice and once yes. And my dad, who is an electrical engineer by trade, thought, well, wait a minute, I specialize in radio frequency, so the transmitter. I also own some patents with telephony, answer detection, and things like that. I could really create a solution that would help people like this. And so he did, and he sort of didn't imagine it to be. I think at the time, according to him, I think at the time he was thinking it was just a side thing where he could help people he knew, and it sort of evolved over time, especially after 2000. We've seen a lot of growth in the industry in the United States is just completely untapped. So many people need this service or benefit from it and don't have it. So we're happy to be that for them.
What an amazing story. It is incredible to see this being part of the origin. I'm really curious about your perspective of this business as you were growing up. How did you start to actually work for the business? Where was your transition point from being a kid to actually running things?
I was born about 4 years later, in 1990. So the business was still very small. I mean, we did operate a monitoring center at the time, but they would go hours in between someone pushing their button. And my dad actually tells this story about the time where they got their first paying subscriber who suddenly they needed a 24-hour monitoring center for one subscriber in case that one person pushed their button. And it happened to be on Valentine's Day. So my mom and dad had to spend that night at work to cover the shift in case that one person needed help. And of course he didn't. But so it sort of evolved from then. So as I mentioned, we're a manufacturer as well. So we manufacture the devices, and that's where I started working in the business when I was a teenager. I don't know, 16 years old or something. It would be mostly summer times and like after school or whatever. But literally on the assembly line, placing components, testing components, moving it down the line, getting it ready for shipment. And that was my first exposure to the business, but at least in terms of me working. But the very first time I remember, like the first memory I realized of what my family was doing here was, I don't know how old I was, but I was young. And my dad came into my bedroom one night. I had already gone to bed, and he said, "Do you want to come to work with me?" And I said, "What?" And he said, "One of our graveyard dispatchers," which at the time was only one person because it was so small. He said, "One of our graveyard dispatchers in the monitoring center is ill and cannot work tonight, so I'm covering their shift. Do you want to come with me?" And I was probably 8 or 9 years old at the time. And I said, "Sure." So I came, and he made me a little bed on the floor, and I remember listening so intently all night to him answering those emergency calls for help. And it was like, that to me like lit a fire. I was like, we're like saving people, we're helping people. It's very important. And from then on until I was 18 years old, which at the time was our limit for hiring dispatchers, I always was eager to start taking emergency calls and being a dispatcher in our monitoring center. It's my favorite part of the business by far. Manufacturing is cool, innovating is cool. I love being on the front line and hearing people when they need help. And I still do that sometimes. I try to do that once a month for a couple hours.
Really, just to get back in the
Yep.
customer-facing
Yeah,
perspective
I
to
think
remember.
it's really good. It's a really good way to keep a pulse on like what policies need to improve and what efficiencies can be added and things like that. So I think it really helps my exposure to lead this team. And currently my role is mainly the monitoring center. I'm the director of the response center and a board member. So I'm involved in a little bit of the other departments, but mainly my day is focused on 100% monitoring.
And do you think that you ended up in, or you chose to go to the monitoring center because of that those formative experiences of seeing how much of an impact people were making over the phone?
I do think that I remember asking my dad at like age 12, like, can I be a dispatcher? And he was like, "No, not at age 12." But and so from then on, it was like that was where I wanted to be. And the minute I turned 18, I started training for that. And I loved it. I still love it. I think it's fun.
So nice to hear people having the experiences of working in family-run businesses. I think it's so cool to have
Yeah.
someone being able to learn from their father or someone. Yeah, it's such a wholesome experience. At least from the outside, it seems like a very wholesome experience.
Yeah, and it's really interesting also to be exposed. Like you said, we met at the Medical Alert Monitoring Association last year, and I've been going to that for a decade now and rubbing shoulders with all the biggest players, the friendly competitors in the industry who are all trying to do the same thing. And it's interesting to see the commonality of, I mean, generally speaking, like 100% of this industry is not just doing it to make a dollar. They're really doing it because they believe that it's so fun to help people. And it really is. I mean, of course, we're all trying to make money as well. But from my viewpoint, and definitely here at Mytrex, the majority of the industry is driven first by helping and second by business, you know?
As a very, very small side tangent, about 5 years ago, when we first started Yo Crew, we did a bit of good work in health tech, and then we went and worked in insurance for about 2 weeks, and then we went straight back to health tech. So we're like, what are we
Two
doing? This
weeks.
isn't. Yeah, we hate this industry.
I get it.
You've had first-hand experience from a very, very young age of monitoring, and then you've seen how monitoring has developed over the last, I know, 10 years, 10, 15 years since that first experience. Where do you see some of the most exciting opportunities for monitoring? And I love it to be specific around monitoring for this. It's nice to be, yeah. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts?
Yeah. Oh, geez, I don't even know. I mean, COVID really threw a wrench into the world, obviously, and we weren't spared from that. It was tricky to be considered a vital employee, an essential employee, because we needed people to be at work. I don't think any monitoring centers were prepared on day one to send people home to work, especially in a crucial emergency environment like emergency dispatch, where you have to be available to answer that phone. You can't have your internet go down at home. You can't have your phone line go down at home. It really was wild. It rewired the way that we need to be efficient and things like that. So to answer your question, I think right now the most exciting thing is that from a business perspective, I think that the generation that is aging currently is used to technology more so than the ones who are already aged in place, the ones that are already 80 years old, for example. They don't necessarily love to wear a device on their wrist or their watch or their neck or wherever they wear it. But the generation coming into that is more apt to do that. They're used to having a device like a cell phone or a mobile PERS device or a wristband that can call for help. All sorts of those things. I think I'm very excited to see what happens in the industry. I think that we'll be able to help more people, and I think anyone in the industry can attest that most of those sales calls coming in to say, "Hey, I think I want one of these for my loved one." The reason that that starts a lot of the times is because they've needed it once already. They fell last week and they laid there for 5 hours until their daughter came over. And I think that that is going to happen less because it's hard to talk that generation into getting it before they need it because they don't like the technology aspect of it. I think that's just my perspective. So I'm excited to see more people adopting the technology because it's not a burden to them.
And in terms of the specific market demographic that you guys are serving, one of the things I'm seeing as a general trend is that monitoring is moving not just from elderly individuals, but maybe towards all people who require some level of monitoring. Is this a
Yeah.
trend you're seeing? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I didn't say this before, but we're a strictly medical alarms only. We don't do burglar, fire monitoring. We don't do anything other than personal emergency response. So as far as the rest of that goes, I can't speak to it, but where Mytrex is at and where medical alert in general is at in this country, I don't know, we're adapting to that future growth and trying to keep up with it, be able to help people as much as they can. And that's actually how I met you, is I see Yokeru as a great tool in having us meet the future demand.
I appreciate that. There's no part of this which is pressurizing you to say anything about
No,
Yokeru.
no, not at all. I just am saying that's a piece of the puzzle that I'm excited about.
Okay, that's really, really cool. I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
And so it's really nice that you're niched down in terms of focusing just on the telecare, the medical alert perspective. In Europe, it tends to be monitoring centers do the telecare piece, they don't do the other burglar alarms piece. But in the States, it tends to be a monitoring center. Lots of them that I've talked to and understand tend to try and do as many different types of monitoring as possible. What are some of the benefits with you being specifically niched down on responding to medical alerts?
Well, I mean, speaking logistically or operationally, it's much easier to specialize in one thing than to be mediocre at a lot. We've really dialed down the medical alert. In fact, if you go to most monitoring centers here in the state, it's exactly like what you said. They're doing as much as they can. Burg, fire, even telematics in cars, all sorts of different monitoring, flood detection, banks, all the things, which are great. We need those things obviously too. But you'll see in those places, they often, I mean, the big ones all sort of have a separate division for medical because it's not the same. It's so easy to define a procedure on a burglar alarm because you do this, 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 and this almost every time. It's really hard to do that for medical alarms because they are very different. I mean, almost every call is different than the one before. So you cannot necessarily have a strict set of procedures that you can't deviate from. What I'm saying is it requires a lot of human judgment to know how to help the person on the phone. To answer your question, that's why I think we enjoy the space we're in is specializing that, because if we weren't doing that, we would most likely still have a separate portion doing just just the medical alarm portion anyways.
And it means people know when they hear the word Mytrex, they know that you're taking that area completely 100% seriously, and you're not
Yes.
trying to get your staff also when they're not dealing with people lying on
Yeah.
the ground following other stuff,
Yeah, that's right.
which is important for reassurance purposes from, I guess, people you work with as well.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is. And it shows in our design product as well, not just our monitoring. I mean, we don't also manufacture Berg and fire panels. We just do medical alarm systems, and we have exposure from all angles of the industry. So we've sort of used that exposure to create a product that really works in the scenarios it's needed.
Which is really, really nice to see focus in businesses. I feel like people probably, I can imagine people asking you, hey, can you do this type of monitoring? And it's very easy to chase and say, yes, yes, yes. But actually, I can imagine there's more longevity and sustainability you just being niched down. One question I have is, in the UK, this is a monitoring center question. In the UK, we have a regulatory body called the TSA, and they stand for the Technology Enabled Care Association, although the acronyms don't match. And it's not just. Yeah. I think it's Technology Service. I'm a member, and so apologies if anyone from the TSA listening, because I'm going to misquote it, but Technology Service something. Anyway, correct information in the link below. In the UK, they have certain regulatory KPIs to hit within the monitoring center. You have to answer a call within 60 seconds. And there's a lot. And one of the things that I'm just a bit vocal about is that sometimes the amount of regulation stifles the amount of innovation in the UK. What is, for people curious about the US and monitoring centers in the medical alert space, how do you ensure a high quality of service?
Interesting. So that's a government agency, or it's a private organization that is a standard?
They're a private organization that's become a standard, and they try and work. I think they say that they work with the government, but they're not a government
Okay,
funded. Pretty sure they're not government funded. So
I
they're
see.
just a wholly. Everyone says, "Oh, we just agree with them because they have this membership that we'll pay money for."
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, we don't have a government agency that sort of defines standards, but there are industry organizations, and in fact, the Medical Alert Monitoring Association was in the process of developing some standards, and I was on the committee for developing those standards. This was like, I mean, it was probably 10 years ago now, but we sort of stopped because it is sort of hard to define an industry standard, I guess. I wish we continued with it, and I would love to get involved with something like that. There is the Monitoring Association, or TMA, is a big United States organization. Their standards are largely focused on security and fire, and a little bit, I mean, and it encompasses PERS as well. Yeah, so those standards exist. There's no requirement to abide by them, though, if that's what your question is.
I personally think I think standards, especially if it's a private organization instilling those standards, where there is, it's up for debate whether or not. I'm going to say this, but might get slapped on the wrist from some of my TSAs. It's hard to know, generally, if a private organization has members who sponsor it, if everyone's being treated in a way that is wholly representative towards the standard. And so I think as soon as that happens, and as soon as there's any question about that happening, it can throw the whole standard into question.
Yeah, that was a big hurdle when we were on this committee years ago developing a medical alert standard, monitoring standard. That was a big hurdle, is how do we enforce it? Is it just the honor system? Like if you say you're compliant with the MAMA standard, how do we know that who's allowed to say that? And is it just basically an honor system? So that was a big hurdle. We never defined that, actually, and that might be the reason why it sort of dissolved. Is what's the point of this if we don't have some way to verify who is doing what? So that's a good question. So to go a step back, the Monitoring Association, or TMA here, like I said, they mainly focus on a big portion of their work is the burglar and fire part of monitoring. Mytrex and myself strongly believe that there's a huge deviation between answering alarms from security and fire and medical. And so to try and lump a standard in that encompasses all three is sort of really hard. And We don't necessarily subscribe to that. We used to be a member of that association, and we're not anymore. But also on the same hand, I know that we far exceed all the standards that they have. Like, for example, our average response time, and I think most people's average response time, because the industry prioritizes medical alarms over burglar alarms. Fire is a little bit of a higher priority to my understanding. Yeah, we far exceed the standards of that organization anyways.
That makes perfect sense. I think I'm yet to find anywhere which is a government still standard. And as you say, there's so much variety between medical and non-medical. It's a bit moot to say, hey, yeah, we're aligned with the standard, which is primarily for something which isn't that what we do. And in terms of so you've seen how the industry's really started from a very small germinating seed into I would say now a small shrub, and there's still a huge amount of forestry to be created. What do you see some of the biggest challenges being in this next period of growth for the next 5-10 years?
I mean, there are studies. Mama does a sort of analysis of the industry every year, and I think last year didn't. Do you remember what they said? I think it was like it barely in the double digits of market penetration. Like we're barely over 10% of penetration, and especially 5-10 years from now, there's going to be many, many more people that have aged into a position where they are at risk for an emergency at home or by themselves. And so yeah, it's gonna be big growth. There's room for everybody to grow, which is a fun atmosphere to be a part of. It's not so cutthroat to be the one to get the deal or whatever. It's really there's room for everybody, and it's exciting to be a part of it.
Yeah, there's that nice saying, which is a rising tide lifts all boats. It definitely feels like that.
That's right. Yeah, that is a very applicable mantra for how it feels.
I've got to tone down the number of metaphors I'm using in this podcast. I think two's enough now.
I'm all for it. Keep it up.
So imagine you wake up one day and you look at the clock and suddenly you're a bit shocked. And the clock no longer says 2025, but it says 2075. And you look in the mirror and you're suddenly an elderly man. Or maybe 2095. You look in the mirror, you're suddenly an elderly man. And you've gone grey and your glasses are twice the thickness because your eyesight's really going. What technology would you want to use on a daily basis to stay independent at home?
And that is like almost impossible at the rate of technology propulsion. It's like by then I am positive in 50 years from now we won't be wearing devices that signal for help. It'll be completely passive. I'm positive that that is what's coming, which is awesome. I mean, if you don't have to worry about charging a device or putting it on or whatever, that's going to change everything. I would say that's the biggest hurdle is grandma says, I don't want to wear a necklace or a wristband or a pendant or whatever they have to wear right now. I mean, don't you think that's how it'll be? I don't think that there'll be a device that you need to wear to signal for help by that time. I don't know though.
I completely agree. I was chatting with someone they do sticky mobility tracking sensors. So you stick to your knee, imagine this is my knee. You put a sensor here and a sensor here, and it tracks your movement in your gait and all of the aspects. And that blew my mind because you can just stick it on at least 2 weeks, and it's like a blood glucose wearable, but for mobility. And it made me think, how mad? That's crazy.
That's incredible. I mean, the other thing is remote patient monitoring is starting to gain traction more so than it was, and I think it's still crazy slow. I think it is such a useful thing, and as we continue, I think more and more hospital systems, healthcare systems, healthcare providers in the United States, I mean, it's much more organized where you're at and free, but it's not here, and people want to reduce their costs, and so if you can catch something before it becomes an emergency, they've just saved a ton of money. Both the person, the patient, and the insurance company just saved a ton of money because they didn't require an ambulance to take you to the hospital that resulted in 2 nights. They caught it 3 days earlier and were able to give you cheaper treatment to prevent something. So I think remote patient monitoring is going to, at some point, it's been like kind of going up, but at some point, I think it's going to skyrocket. So we'll
Yeah.
see how that goes too. I'm excited for that.
You mentioned that one of your thoughts is we are going to move towards a world where we have passive monitoring more and more. How does this inform your thoughts around where Mytrex is heading if you know at some point in the future we're not going to be wearing devices?
We will obviously adapt. We're innovative in that regard. We're not ever almost first to market because we tend to be slower at I don't want to say that others aren't perfecting it, but like we really go through a rigorous process before we deem it safe to release. And we've never had a recall. We've never had anything like that where we have to suddenly fix a problem that we didn't know existed before we released it. So we'll be probably a little bit slower. I'm not saying a lot slower, but we'll adapt to that when the time comes. I know those things exist already. Passive monitoring does exist here in the States and probably around the world. However, the market isn't quite in a spot to bear it, in my opinion. It's too expensive, it's hard to install. It requires them to usually have like a Wi-Fi connection or an internet connection. I think some might have a cellular connection as well, which overcomes that hurdle. But in the big scheme of things, especially because in the United States, a, a giant chunk of people with medical alarms are being paid for by government programs. So whether that's at the county level or the state level or just an aging area waiver program, there's so many different avenues to have this device funded for you. They're not willing to pay for that technology yet. It is too expensive to be able to write a check when an almost same solution that has a pendant can be done. So that when that's such a big chunk of the market, you have to do what they're willing to pay for. They're not willing to pay for that yet. So we'll see. I think as time goes on, it'll get cheaper and easier, and technology will make it better, and that will definitely be an avenue that I think that it continues to. It's much like the evolution of mobile PERS. I mean, 10 years ago, it was still fairly new to have a mobile device instead of an in-home device, and nowadays it's 70% of new or more even of new signups. Like if you're becoming a medical or subscriber somewhere, the huge majority are electing to do a mobile device that they can take with them to the grocery store rather than an in-home. And so that's a perfect example of the technology evolving and the market going with it.
It's as you say, always driven by the consumer, and so
Yeah,
as they start to want to leave and they have more freedom,
yeah,
then they'll be drawing it more.
for sure.
So sadly, we've it's been such a quick episode, at least in my opinion. I'm not sure how you felt it, but I feel like we're just scratching the surface of your experiences. For the people who are listening and who are innovators and curious about the market, curious about the PERS and the medical alert industry, the people who want to come and set up a new device or enter into an exciting business, what encouraging words would you give to people thinking about entering this space?
There's room for everybody. I think that's encouraging. The market, like I said, is so untapped. You're sure there are the big Goliaths in the industry, and they do suck up a lot of the business, but when we're only 12 to 15% tapped to everybody that would or could use this, there's room. I mean, it is a money maker. I mean, you will make money. It is sort of a hard get at first because it takes money to make money. The cost per acquisition is high. You don't necessarily break even for quite a while on an individual level, but it blankets. I mean, that recurring revenue model it's good. It's really fun and secure. I mean, it's predictable to say, well, next month I'm going to make this much money. The company will have this much revenue because it's so predictable from month to month, year to year.
It is it average user using the device? Is it because I think in Europe it's about 18 months. Is that similar to the States as well?
Ours is higher than that, actually. Yeah, I'm surprised. Ours is higher than that. I want to say Mama said that the low average is 24 months and the high is 32. We're seeing an average personally here between our wholesale dealers that we monitor for closer to 36 months. That's just our internal statistic is between 30 and 36 months seems to be the average. And keep in mind that is a lump sum of all of our subscribers that we monitor for our dealers. and that includes a giant chunk of government funded and a giant chunk of managed care, and also a giant chunk of retail, private paying. I'm writing a check myself to pay for this. So between those three, that seems to be the average. If we were to dive in and break it down by those three sections, it would be vastly different, I think. The government tends to be a little bit shorter of a lifespan for the account.
That's really interesting. Well, Mike, it's been a pleasure, and I really, really enjoyed the conversation. Really glad we managed to make this happen. And thank you so much for your time, your wisdom, and sharing the awesomeness of what it is to have grown up in the PERS space and then continue making an impact. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.